Okay, կարող եք սկսեք, պարոն Պանոսյան։
Շատ շնորհակալ եմ, Ժորա. Good morning, everybody. Good evening, wherever you are. This is the ARPA Institute panel discussion, and we are happy to have a very esteemed group of people today to participate in our panel discussion. As you know, ARPA Institute organizes monthly, sometimes bi-monthly panel discussions or presentations on various topics related to Armenia or Armenians. ARPA Institute has been working in Armenia for 30 years now, and actually this year is the 30th anniversary, which we are going to celebrate with a one-day conference and a banquet in June. June 11 is the target date that we have decided. And ARPA Institute works with the government of Armenia, with the Academy of Sciences, several institutes, as well as the universities. And our main target is the younger generation to provide assistance in high technology, healthcare, education, science, and many other areas. ARPA is composed by experts from various fields, and our main objective is to assist Armenia in any field that we can. Currently, our main project is to develop, to establish, and to construct a clean room, the first class 1000 clean room in the Alekhanian National Lab, so that the scientists in Armenia can perform high-level, very high technical experimentation that requires clean environments. And also we have many other projects that are ongoing. We are working with the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, and Sports to establish the process of science fairs in all of the schools of Armenia. And we already have formally worked on the first formal and science fair last year, and two of the teams participated in the International Science and Engineering Fair that happens every year in the US, and all over the world, countries participate by sending their projects. Armenia was not participating, and this last year was the first participation. And fortunately, one of the teams won fourth prize, which is a $500 award. For the first year, that's a very fantastic outcome. So we are trying to expand the process as much as possible, because we believe that students, when they work on projects, they do research, they find out new things, and they think innovatively, and also they are learning in the process. They learn how to present themselves, how to organize a project on a display board, and also how to do experimentation or solve problems in a scientific method. So this will help students understand what science is and how it can benefit each and every one of them. We also have the annual invention competition for young scientists that is happening now for the 13th year. And we would like to, everyone who can, to distribute our flyer to any student or any young scientist who has anything that is innovative and can present it to our invention competition. So today we are excited, very happy to have this panel on trends in the economy of Armenia, prospects for the future. And the participating panelists are Dr. Vace Gabrielian, a former deputy minister, Dr. King Banayan, who is the dean of the School of Economics in Pennsylvania, Dr. Ruben Injikyan, who works in the United Nations. And as a discussant, we have Dr. Armen Kherlopian, who is also a part of works at NASA and has many contributions to Armenia. And our moderator.
Oh, may I correct you? I
Yes.
retired from the United Nations and I work as a professor at Webster University, Geneva.
Yes, actually.
Which is an American university.
Yes, David will introduce all the panelists. I'm just.
Okay.
Sorry.
I know more
Okay.
in United Nations.
Okay, and then the moderator will be Dr. David Julfayan, which has worked with ARPA for the past several years and also has done quite a bit for Armenia. So I would like to introduce David and then he can take over. David is a Washington-based economist and an adjunct professor of economics at Georgetown University. He also works at the Treasury Department. He has worked on diverse areas of economics and public policy. His research on the behavioral effects of taxes and on entrepreneurship, philanthropy, intergenerational transfers, savings, labor and work effort, and other topics is widely published in scholarly journals and books. He has previously taught at Georgetown University, Middlebury College, and Yerevan State University, and very briefly served as the Treasury Technical Advisor at the Ministry of Finance of Armenia. After teaching at Yerevan State University, he co-founded the Armenian Economic Association, which is very active actually, and they organize a lot of different conferences. David, the floor is yours.
Yes, that would be great, but I need video access. So, but that's okay. I can do it without video access, I suppose. So I'm delighted
Jora will connect you. Jora will connect you.
Okay, super. I'm here. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm delighted to join ARPA again. As someone who spent a lot of time studying the Armenian economy, I always thought I was a step ahead. And every time you're a step ahead, the dynamics of the place change so dramatically that you really have to keep abreast of all the changes, not only the local, but also in the regional. So in many ways, I'm very happy that Vace Gabrielian, the Dean of the College of Business and Economics at the American University, to join us today, is a person who's done it all, has been in the government, the central bank, and academia, and he's definitely the go-to person on the Armenian economy. So,
David, and also we should recognize that the Minister of Economy, Mr. Kherlopian, is also with us.
Right. Welcome, Minister, and I also want to welcome the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Nerses Yerevan.
Yes.
Vace, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you see?
Yes.
I will go briefly and I will just do the setup for my colleagues to dwell on, and I will just give the picture of how is the economy now and give some thoughts based on which I hope my colleagues would build on for a longer term perspective. If we are looking at the growth rates of the industry, or by the industry, Armenian growth rates, you can see that in 2021, the overall rate is here, the last one. It's, I'm sorry, the beginning one, 5.7. This is the overall GDP growth rate. And we can see that we have the highest growth rates in accommodation and food service activities, which is 60%. It is largely because of the base in 2020, when a lot of tourist industry couldn't operate due to COVID-19 restrictions. Similarly, in health and health and social work activities, we have also a lot of things due to COVID, because the health system has to respond and actually do a lot of performance because of the increased care of the patients. But overall, we have 5.7 growth rate, which is higher than many anticipating, including me. Then, if we are going to look at the price impact, and I'm not using the word deflator here because there's not official numbers, I'm just looking at the numbers that officially they didn't calculate as deflators. I just divided the output for 2021 or current prices over the average prices of the last year. So you can see that there is a large increase in the mining prices. And overall, there is agriculture, hunting, there is basically agriculture also quite high, rise in prices. This is about 2021 output, just to ground you what the realities are. Consumer price index, overall we have 7.7. And on major groups, we had food and alcoholic beverages and clothing, and recreation and culture, well above double digits. But interestingly enough, with these numbers, if we are comparing regionally, how the countries in our region have performed, most of the countries with same economic conditions, former Soviet Union countries, Eurasian Economic Union, etc., they usually have recovered the slump that they had in 2020. We didn't. We are still a couple of points below, and we will recover it in a couple of months, I believe. So it's not an issue of not recovering. And inflation-wise, although the inflation is high according to many standards, if you are comparing to the regional countries, it is the lowest in comparison. Just this is to give a comparative base. If we are looking at the GDP structure over the last 10 years, you can see a couple of developments that are obvious. And first one, you can see that we have a steadily declining rate, a contribution to the economy of GDP of agriculture. And we are declining from 18% in 2013 to around 11% in 2020. Mining and quarrying is increasing as well, and there are a lot of investments going there. And actually, in 2020 and 21, it had significant impact in economic structure. Manufacturing is increasing, which is also a good sign, and we are seeing a constant increase. 2021 is not the best compared to the previous year, but still it is in the same growth pattern. Electricity, gas, we are not growing because the exporting capabilities are not there. Construction, we have to understand that we are going down from a very high base in the 2008-9, and from there we are going down. But this year we have quite an increased production of construction. Then you can see that financial and insurance activities are on rise, and human health work activities over the last 2 years, which is again explained by COVID. If we go on the expenditure structure, you can see a very interesting development that total final consumption expenditure is a little bit going down. Gross capital formation is more or less stable, and net exports of goods and services is actually improving. If we look down into this component in more detail, we can see that it is not only the exports growing, but also from 2018 and 19, we have significant contraction of imports. And you can further look into the details because there are structure issues and there are a lot of capital goods coming in. So when you have contraction, it's not all bad. But the trend is not only because from disastrous 2020, we have recovered and we had an increase in exports, which is quite good and significant. There is also increase compared to 2020 in imports. So in this last year, we have seen a simultaneous rise in exports and imports, with exports growing faster. And as a result, the net exports are 7.9% of GDP, instead of 10. There is a very interesting thing that I would like to draw to your attention, which is if we are looking at the compensation patterns about how inclusive the economy is, let's frame it this way. And we can see that actually one of the most interesting patterns is that real estate activities, there is gross operating surplus and gross mixed income, which is the component is the highest, and it is the least amount of the workers there. And if you look at productivity numbers, one would say that this is the most productive industry, but it is not, because it's a lot of real estate activity that doesn't actually need a lot of input. Interestingly enough, we can see that if we compare two industries that are quite important for Armenia, which is mining and coring, we have compensation 41%, and we have information and communication 51%. This is the highest growing industry with the highest salaries currently. And when I was looking at the last numbers of 2021, average salaries were about 2 times higher than in industry than in other places, at least 2 to 2.5 times higher. So, but there is also a very interesting thing that we have to remember, that IT industry in Armenia, which is here information and communication, usually is very much like an industry that should be compared to a certain education, public administration, education, etc. Why? Because we have not many industrial capacities. It is a lot of research, design, and development work, but a lot of our companies are engaged, for example, in chip design, but it doesn't mean they are engaged in further activities with chips. They are not engaged neither in manufacturing nor marketing and financial activities. And financial and insurance activities is also quite low. They have high productivity, but also the kind of inclusiveness part is not very high. Okay. If you are looking at the country destination of Armenia's foreign trade, we can see how important is actually Russia in our trade. As you can see, in our exports, it is steadily increasing until 2019, and the data are not available for 2021 in a consolidated form. So I just took the yearly data from National Statistical Service without getting into the monthly reports and accumulating them. And you can see that out of the countries that have relations, the ones that have numbers that are in above 100 millions is very few. And if you are looking at United States, our relationship are pretty comparable to the country, our neighbor, Iran, which is under severe sanctions by them. And the trade is not very large with them as well. But as you can see that in imports, we have quite large, and it's mostly gas that goes back as electricity. So this is the trade patterns in general with who we trade. and what the patterns are. The largest countries are partners. In 2017, Georgia was among the largest, although it's a neighboring country and a lot of our trade is happening through Georgia. It is actually not a country that by any numbers in 2020 had about $100 million turnover. The export structure, if you look here, you can see that the largest export part is crude materials, inedible except fuels, which is basically our ore, which is copper. And if we are going into this, as far as our industry is concerned, it is beverages and tobacco and food. Manufactured goods are in there as well compared, but again, manufactured goods are very often can be canned foods or something similar. If we are looking at import structure, we can see that food is important, fuels, manufactured goods, and machinery and transport equipment. There is a very interesting development over remittances, if you can look here. In 2021, our net remittances were almost as high as in 2008, which is the peak years of the double-digit growths, although it is slightly below the absolute champions with these years, which is 2012, 13, and 14. If you are looking at the composition of it, it is quite interesting country-wise. Usually the remittances that are coming, once they were the engine of growth in early 2000s, now they are not as important, but the composition change is a quite interesting one. In 2020 and 2021, what we have is net flow from the United States is increasing. And usually it was a negligible number. Now it is a significant number, almost comparable to the money that is coming from from Russia. And Russian money is mostly not remittances to relatives. It is factor income, if you get more technical, which is remittances by the guest workers that are in seasonal migration or non-seasonal, but they are working migration. From the United States, we don't have that type of flow of people migrating, so there is a different type of flow, but the pattern is quite interesting. Then I would like to just raise a couple of questions for the nearest term future. I understand that many of you are going to look at a larger picture, which is longer, but given particularly the developments now, there are a couple of things that we have to discuss or give opinions to. I would particularly address or propose to go over a couple of possibilities of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the repercussions for Armenia. The government plans for 7% growth, hoping that continuing recovery will help to outperform the 4-5% growth potential of the economy. On the plus side, there is a momentum in construction that is quite large undertaking, and it will carry on. There are other developments as well. At the same time, the 2021 copper increase impact will wane by May because you can see the steadily increasing price of copper by about 50%, starting somewhere from April, May. So there are a couple of things on balance. And it is time to see that we can have more investments and more economic activity, more demand coming in or not. For example, there is possibility that we'll have more tourists because the likelihood of Russian tourists not going to other places is quite large. Remittances, once a major cushion, one-time most important source of growth, will decline in all likelihood with two developments. Expected US monetary policy tightening impacting the inflow from the US. This is not going to happen overnight. And I don't believe that if the United States is going to raise the interest rate at least a couple of times, starting from next month, etc., it is going to immediately cut it. But if the monetary policy is going to become less loose, it is going to have impact because there is going to be less money, higher inflation, and the likelihood of money coming in the same quantities is becoming less. And the other thing is, I think it's almost certain that Russian ruble will devaluate, in my pretty rough reading of tea leaves, about 20%, at least. So it is going to impact the dollar value inflow from the Russian migrants because they are sending money in rubles and not in dollars. So the overall dollar value inflow is going to decrease. The devalued ruble, on the other hand, is going to increase imports from Russia. And we had a similar development in 2015 when the Russian ruble devalued twice or twofold. And we had a lot of trade flows shifting from other countries to Russia because Russian produce suddenly became much more affordable. And this is also meaning that it is going to make the margins thinner for exporters, particularly if we are talking about food and beverages that we are exporting to Russia. They are going to have to compete in more competitive environment. And today, the topic of the day, I'm always distracted to see what is happening and how it can have impact on economy. The topic of the day is whether Russia will be cut off the SWIFT system. It's not going to be the end of it all, and the trade flows from Russia's energy hydrocarbons to the West is going to continue because in this 2 days of intense fighting, nothing happens to the pipelines. But there is a significant problem that is going to be with all the Russian financial system and with their relationships to the West. This means that Armenian banks and companies are going to be recipients of funds from Russian citizens and businesses. So maybe nurses can prove, I think we are already seeing some interest on behalf of them in the banking system. They are calling Armenian banks to see. On the other hand, this means also that we are going to be under much tighter scrutiny in the banking system. And this is going to create a regulatory burden or compliance burden. And this is going to also have repercussions for Armenian banks because Armenian banks cannot overcome their relationships with the Russian banking system because it is the largest trading partner. So on overall, I believe that it is extremely hard to tell the future, especially in this type of volatile times with a lot of developments being possible. But there are both positive and negative trends that continue in our economy. And on this background, I would invite my colleagues to explore what is going to happen in the near term and in the longer term, because I believe the near term also has impact on the longer term, because as you can see in the economic structure, there are no abrupt changes. All the changes are happening gradually, and this 10-year prospect shows that some things like professional, scientific, and technical activities are not rising too fast. On the other hand, other things are actually happening. And we can see that IT industry, communication industry is also rising, not at the speed that we would like to, because we have limited human capacity. We don't have enough students for IT companies to hire, but still, this inertia is quite a real and important thing. And whenever we are looking in the future, let's also think how we can overcome the structural inertia of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Vache. That's a great presentation. I think the current crisis in Russia and Ukraine, I would agree with you. It may have some serious implications for Armenia. And it's probably very worthy of a future event. Perhaps ARPA could invite another panel to revisit the issue. A quick question I have for you before I open up to the other panelists is, I always think of Armenia as two economies. You have two economies. You have Yerevan, and then you have the rest of the country. And that's where remittances and other things may have a play. So when we look at these growth rates for Armenia, do you have any feeling what's happening to this divide, essentially, where Yerevan and the rest of the country, mostly the rural areas, might be on a different economic path? Any thoughts, Vache?
I believe that Yerevan, and actually agglomeration near Yerevan, is producing about 55% of the output, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe the minister can correct me if I'm wrong. And it has higher speed of development than the rest of the country. So although we have been talking about it for many years, at least I remember 25 years, we are talking about more even regional development. It's not easy to achieve. And there have been different initiatives, starting from roads construction of North-South Highway to increased road maintenance during recent years. But otherwise, infrastructure-wise, we are still lagging behind, and we are not lagging behind only on physical infrastructure, but also in the soft one, particularly education. So from this perspective, I think the gap is widening, and it's not, again, an issue of current government. I'm not saying the government is not doing good. It is an economic thing that is happening over the last 20, 25 years at least. And there is no trend changing behavior.
Thank you, Vache. I have some questions in the chat room. And so what I'd like to do for the questions from the public, from the audience, is to keep these to the end of all the presentations and give an opportunity to the panelists to see if they have any questions or any thoughts they want to raise or comments that they may have. Ruben, King, Armenia, have any thoughts you want to add? And if not, perhaps since we have the Minister of the Economy, Kerobian, I don't know if you want to add something to the topic. You're not part of the panel, but if you like, and since you honor us with your presence, we'd like to take this opportunity, if you may. If you will.
I think that it's better to comment after the panelists, if there is a time. I think that respectful panelists should go first, and then, of course, I have many things to tell about overall economic strategy and particularly about this situation with Russian.
Very well said. Okay, Ruben Indigjan is our next speaker. He's a professor at the in Geneva at the Webster University in Geneva. Okay, I think I lost the screen here. Okay. Ruben has a distinguished career at the UN, and he'll talk to us about strategies and IT and exports in Armenia. He's an expert on digital economy, and it's something that I'm not very well abreast of. So I'm really very pleased that he will be able to join us today and talk to us. Ruben, as you prepare this, I'm impressed by the folders that you have. I know it's not part of your presentation, but it is. Okay, the floor is yours, Ruben.
Thank you very much, David. Everybody sees my presentation? Do you see my presentation?
Yes, Ruben, can you? Yeah, we see. Thank you.
Yeah, I will skip it. This presentation is a follow-up work on Armenia, which I did. I worked in the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development from 1982 until 2011. And in 90s and 2000s, I was already on the level of manager, and I created e-commerce program there and trade finance programs, and tried to implement projects in Armenia, having in mind that Armenia, after such a huge collapse after the Soviet Union losing 70% of its economy, should somehow revive. And at a very early stage, with the development of internet, it came to our mind that selling services and selling very light goods, high value added goods, would be a strategy for Armenia. So basically, I participated actively in Armenia 2020 project with Nubar Afeyan and Ruben Vartanyan. And I was one of the main speakers at the last conference in 2005, where I gave the strategies of export-oriented development for Armenia. And then I gave it to Tigran Davtyan. And since then, I was speaking all the time with Armenian government, including the distinguished minister who is now here on a virtual level, but I hope soon I will meet in Yerevan or in Geneva. But basically, Armenia was sort of moving in the direction of what we were proposing to the government and to the country. In other words, development of the export of services and through internet and everything what can be digitized, as well as development of the light, high value added products which can be transported by the air, given the geographical and geopolitical situation of Armenia. When I was working on that, I tried also to compare Armenia with Switzerland, Israel, Ireland, and Cyprus for different reasons. Switzerland historically was a landlocked country with difficult situation. Now it is one of the richest. Israel is also countries which have, Ireland and Cyprus, countries which have big diasporas. And Israel and Cyprus were developing successfully in a hostile environment. And Ireland was a very interesting story because it performed its miracle, in fact, during the period of the collapse of the Soviet Union, in other words, in 90s and 2000s. And interestingly, that I proposed to Armenian Development Agency have an Irish advisor to follow up by the steps of Ireland, and it was the case in that time. So basically, that is the comparison which I made. And of course, in some cases, in Irish case, you had the FDI coming from the USA. In Cyprus case, you had a development of offshore and company services, which I also proposed for Armenia after Cyprus joined at the Armenia 2020 and to the government. When Cyprus joined the European Union, its offshore status became more difficult for the country, and I proposed that Armenia could take a role of an important business and financial services provider to the regions of Middle East and former Soviet countries. And of course, Israel, in case of Israel, I was stressing the high-tech industrial capacity and capacity of Israel is it was a startup nation. It has as much as startup companies, is second to the US by the number of startup companies, and so on and so forth. So, but of course, unlike Switzerland, of course, Armenia has a much more difficult situation with online routes, and unlike other three comparators, we have no access to sea. But basically, looking into the historical experience, economic history of comparator countries, it was also very much about the good government, development of human resources, ambition to excel in chosen sectors, and try to create a public-private partnership in the country with the support of diaspora, so that it will give not business as usual, as Vace explained the situation of Armenian economy. This is basically ups and downs economics, but we should remember that Armenia is not in a situation of peaceful coexistence and sort of more or less good development. On the contrary, it has existential questions, and it needs to be much more ambitious than compare itself with neighbors. Maybe at least it should compare itself with former Baltic states, which was the case in the Soviet period, where the development of Armenia was comparable to the development of Estonia, Latvia, for example. But unfortunately, due to the policy and institutional failures of the previous periods, I don't want to go into that, we stayed quite underdeveloped with a relatively low per capita income, dependent on remittances, and we couldn't improve on our quality of education, unfortunately. It was a good news that Russian Armenian university performed better than the university which I graduated, the famous GIMO. For me, it was a good news, but overall, Russian Armenian university in university rankings were far above other universities, such as Yerevan University and Polytechnical, and probably a medical school, which are the main key universities on which a country should concentrate in order to improve the qualities of its education, but as well develop other educational institutions, basically. So in my proposal of export strategies, which is not very original, but it was original in 2005, and I'm seeing that McKinsey was repeating its report of 2005. McKinsey is proposing in Futures Armenian the development for Armenia of IT and digital, health and education, tourism, and agriculture. These are the sectors which McKinsey in the recent report of Future Armenians for Armenia 2041 was proposing. I must say that I contributed to the writing. I was a consultant of my former institution, UNCTAD, where I worked 30 years. My colleagues produced the UNCTAD investment policy review for Armenia in 2019, where they stressed the following industries which have a big sort of prospects for development: textile and garment, tourism, high-tech and innovation, they call it, data science and artificial intelligence. So let's put it into the category of IT and research and development in pharma and larger scale generics manufacturing. These were the sectors which UNCTAD mission came to Armenia, and I also was in Armenia at the conference Summit of Minds, where I was moderating the investment to Armenia session. But of course, we well know that there is a big problem of capital accumulation, especially accumulation of external capital in the form of foreign direct investment. Given our geopolitical situation, governance issues, and the issue of trust between diaspora and local businessmen, which should be greatly improved in order to facilitate the flow of investment coming from, first of all, diaspora, and on the shoulders of diaspora, hopefully of non-Armenian investors. But there are also good news. I watched a very good interview of an American investor from Silicon Valley who is in Yerevan, who says that there is a critical mass of knowledge, capacity. There should be an ambition so that country will really start exporting IT products and services. So basically, in my proposal, you know, I was concentrating on everything which can be exported by internet, services and goods which can be digitized and re-digitized, and of course further developing those goods which has a higher level of value added and complexity, which also reflects the issue of the level of the productivity, labor productivity in Armenia, which unfortunately is still very low. Here we need a breakthrough so that the things which are already, for example, Armenia is producing diamonds, jewelry, some equipment, but the quantity and quality of these goods should be improved, and the air freight should be used to move these goods outside, apart from what Armenia is now exporting as a commodity-dependent economy, which are mining products and which are agricultural products. Okay. And of course, it is important to look to the strategies of developing on a sectorial level, where I proposed the offshore business and financial services, as I said, sort of replicating the experience of Cyprus, but at the same time follow the financial action task force rules, because now it is much more stricter. Tourism, I don't want to repeat. Everybody knows the value of tourism of early Christianity, which needs better infrastructure, more higher value tourism, but already Armenia is very popular on the lower end tourism, especially coming from Russia and other countries. And from the situation of having not very good education and maybe medical services, given our historical capacities, memory, and talents, I think we as a country can develop very high-level medical services industry and high-level education services industry, which will first of all service its citizens, improving the quality of its labor and improving its productivity, but it can be also services provided to foreigners, both medical and education services and other skills. Of course, our workforce should be trilingual and better prepared. So basically, I am proposing create, and I think the government is working on that, to create auspicious macro environment, have a quite competitive exchange rates using regime of crawling peg of drum dollar parity and keeping floating exchange rate regime quite flexible, sometimes accepting slight or gradual depreciation. Consider about access of enterprises, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, to the credits at lower than market interest rates, which is a part of industrial policy, and of course improve the transparency of the economy, credit information, credit rating, so that the enterprises will get better access to trade finance in order to be able to export. Okay, and of course here I am proposing what should be done. I will not dwell on this slide, but basically it's about the introduction of modern corporate practices, and when the number of enterprises doing these modern corporate practices will become critical, that will make Armenia better credit and political risk for foreign investors. Okay, and of course the government and private sector, I mean, they both need visionary leadership, and they should create a number of institutions and advisory services which will help them to take right decisions in time and quite quickly, and move in the right direction. Okay, so basically I propose to create a advisory competitiveness council of Armenia with the government, so that it can get all this new and better practices, including from the comparator countries, and also prepare the Armenian policymakers in terms of giving them access to these countries so that they can go and see how they succeeded, but also bring from there, for example, they could bring the experts from Cyprus who were instrumental in designing the institutions and policies of Cyprus in developing business and financial services, who can work as advisors and help to create the legal and institutional framework for business and financial services of Armenia as a hub regional for Middle East and former Soviet countries. And finally, I propose also as Armenia politically has parties which are not based on the ideology, left and right, and it has different history, the role of think tank, independent think tank, which will be respected by the government, could be very important. For example, I propose Armenia Development Institute as a think tank, which drafts every year with top economists, including from abroad, Armenia Development Report, and call this top experts and government ministers, like we are doing now, to the forum in Yerevan and discuss what government did right and business sector did right, what they did wrong, and what they should change. And then the report would be published, and the shorter report can be submitted to Prime Minister and government to consider these recommendations. Okay, so basically, I think now we are in, although we are in a difficult geopolitical situation, but the geoeconomics of good practices become an example, hopefully, and the major players will also let us perform as we are dreaming. So this sort of a dream presentation is important, so because we need to have a perspective and we need to be ambitious as Armenians, because our history obliges us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. You've touched on a lot of interesting and important topics, I would say. And you have a lot of wonderful ideas, and that raises a lot of questions of who will be doing or who would be implementing all these ideas and how fast. So I'll address one question, and again, I'll open it up for the rest of the panel. One critical element of a lot of things that you've proposed is the role of the educational of institutions, in particular academic institutions. Obviously, they're not the only ones, but that would be an important element. And so one question that had been on my mind and many others is there's very little investment in the education sector in Armenia. Of course, it's not the Armenian government's fault. I mean, it just resources are limited. And the question is, where would this funding come from? Where would the training would come from? Where's the capacity building? Armenia has a lot of competent, a lot of well-trained scientists, mathematicians. The question is, do we have enough of them? Do we have enough economists? Do we have a lot of individuals with expertise in financial engineering, in management? I can go on and on and on. And so I'll throw this back to you, Ruben, since you've done a lot of work in related areas for the past 30, 40 years. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on this. Thank you.
Yes. In fact, a very good question. Thank you, David. So Armenia used to be considered as the Silicon Valley of the Soviet Union and had one of the best Academy of Sciences in the Soviet Union. That's why we had the accelerator, we had Astrophysical Institute, we have Ali Khanian Institute, we had many things, but we lost many things. Now the question is how to recreate that capacity. We have a problem of low income and capital accumulation within Armenia, and to do that, we need some kind of a resource mobilization. Individual benefactors like Ruben Vartanyan, they go for their own projects, and they create, there is this Diligent, but it's not for Armenians. There is this TUMO, but my point is that education, science should become the national effort on private-public basis. For that, there should be a kind of an advisory body which should coordinate all the initiatives in the area of education and science, so that the government in charge of education will see, and science, how much resources are allocated to which branch, because now it is done in a chaotic way. It's not a market which decides the better outcome in this case. It's a well-designed strategies, understanding where our comparative advantages are, and putting resources into that and asking diaspora to bring into National Fund of Science and Education this money and have a governing body which will then allocate together with government, because these people brought their money and they want to see where it is going. So through the negotiation process, they should agree that they should finance this project or that project. But it should be on an overall national level, capacity building in education and science. Otherwise, it is just, pictures in the museum. Here and there, some advancements, but on an overall level. Second, we have now possibility to teach online. So distance teaching should become very sort of common practice for Armenian universities, and the best professors, Armenian and non-Armenian, funded by Armenian diaspora, should give courses to Armenian students in Yerevan. And that is what we are doing now. I am teaching like this at Webster University. During the pandemic taught us the beauty of internet economy. So we should use it for education. The same is true for the exchange of academics, their knowledge. You don't need to go. Of course, people like to go to nice countries, live in nice hotels, but it is unnecessary from the point of view of the exchange of information and analysis. It could be done at much cost-efficient way, and the money should go not on travel, but hotels, but on increasing the knowledge of Armenian scientists as needed. I don't hear you.
Thank you, Ruben. One thought I had, I want to make sure, my first visit to Armenia was in the early 90s. And I don't want us to go into this depressing mode that things are bad. Compared to what Armenia was some 25, 30 years ago, it's a much, much better place. What we're looking at is in terms of where do you go from a $4,000 per capita GDP to something like 2030 and essentially improve the livelihood of many. And so I just want to make sure that that's the direction that we're going in these discussions. So panelists, any thoughts, questions?
Sure.
I'll just wait to make my comments when I give my own remarks. Thanks, David.
We have no comments from the panelists. Let's move on to King Banayan. He's the Dean of the School of Public Affairs at St. Cloud State University. First time I've heard of King was probably about 15 years ago. He, in my mind, he was probably, but before that, probably he was the first person I knew of who wrote on remittances and potential impact on Armenia. Correct me if I'm wrong, King. And so he's a long timer in terms of being interested in economics, in matters at least related to economics in Armenia. And with that, I open the King, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you everyone for the chance to speak today. And I thank you also for having these sessions in English. I grew up in many places outside of where you could learn to speak Armenian. I grew up in New England, it was 35 miles to the nearest Armenian church. I then went to graduate school in the Los Angeles area, but 30 miles from Glendale or Pasadena. And so there were no chances that it was a long drive there too. And now I live in Minnesota, where I've been on the faculty here since 1984. I'm glad to have had the chance to meet Hagop and understand ARPA many, many years ago. So thank you for that. The number of Armenians that live in my community, you could probably fit in my living room. It's not a very big house. So I say this all to say, I often get asked questions when they find out I'm Armenian. First thing they ask is, where is that? And what's that like? And what's it about? There's a complete lack of understanding, ignorance of what it's like. And Ruben kind of reminded me of this in his remarks. And so my one remark about his piece, I could talk about the education question you asked, David. I'm a dean now, so I have lots of thoughts about how to build schools and universities that someday perhaps I could get to. But maybe we'll wait for that till later if there's interest in that question. But I was thinking about the issue that Ruben started with, because when people ask me what's Armenia like, and I say, well, it's basically a small landlocked nation with bad neighbors, and they kind of smile at me and say, "What does that mean?" I said, "Well, I don't really want to explain that because I'd rather tell you about the history, because it's a great country and it has a great history, a rich history, and let me tell you about that history." But if you want to know what it's like today, and if you just woke up in 2021 or 2022 and asked what's Armenia, that's the answer you'd get by looking at a map and fiddling around with Google and so forth. That's what you'd figure out. It's a small landlocked country. It's got its best neighbors may in fact be Iran and Georgia, without much of a doubt, and it's subject to the same kind of pressures that have caused issues in Georgia, in recently in Kazakhstan, and now we're talking this weekend about Ukraine. So it has all of those things going on in it. So I thought I would try to focus down on this piece, because what Ruben just mentioned to you, and I want to say something about what a couple questions that Vache asked in his piece, his excellent piece as well, is the landlocked piece is important. Most of what Ruben showed you as examples of small countries and their strategies for how they're going to develop are different than Armenia in that one aspect. Armenia is landlocked. The only one he told you about that is landlocked is Switzerland. Singapore, Israel, Ireland, all have access to seaports. And so it gives you a different opportunity for an international strategy, because international development and a development strategy, because the sea is the cheapest way to send things from place to place. I'm now a dean of a school of public affairs. I've got a geography department here, so I spend a lot more time thinking about geography than I ever did in my first 35 years of my work as a professional economist. And I learned a lot about what does it mean to have a sea around you, and I think that matters. And so if you are small and landlocked and you need to develop what you're going to do, you focus on exactly those things that Ruben talked about. You focus on things that have high value added, that are easy to transport, that could probably travel on a plane as easily as and probably wouldn't need a train, and certainly doesn't need a boat. So the transportation issues are tremendously important in this area. A reliance on internet is tremendously important in our development strategies we talk about now versus what we talked about when we were first talking about these things 20 years ago. And so I encourage you who are listening to me to think about, how does Armenia escape that description of a small landlocked country with bad neighbors around it, because it's a perfect description of what Paul Collier called in his first book, The Bottom Billion. The billion poorest people in the world live in countries that have these kinds of aspects to them, and being landlocked with bad neighbors is two of the ways in which you can very easily end up one of the poor ones. Something that actually leads you to lead you out of that morass, lead you out of that bottom billion, is in fact the idea of having foreign direct investment. So let me turn to that particular thought. What is it that leads to foreign direct investment in a country, and what determines it? Economic distance. How close are you to your trading partners? Okay, an advantage Switzerland has, of course, it lives in the middle of Europe. And so it's small, it's landlocked. It doesn't have a very big manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector it does have makes the high value goods that we were talking about. Many of us probably are wearing Swiss watches because they're lovely, and beautiful pieces of beautiful timepieces. And they are the way in which we are they trade with the rest of the world. So your distance from trade neighbors is important. It's why we are so involved in Armenia with Russia, because they're our nearest large neighbor that has the opportunity to be a market to which we can export. Okay, so that's why we're talking about Russia and Ukraine this weekend, is based on that. Secondly, the size of the host market. Okay, it is not a very big market, and that's one of the issues. Agglomeration effects, the fact that you will see countries specialize in certain areas. You'll build specialization on top of specialization to learn how to make certain things and get better at them as you go on. Those are their factor costs. I think Vace already mentioned something about wages in various countries. Maybe that was a conversation we had before we went live with this presentation. Fiscal incentives, okay. What is the government doing to encourage foreign direct investment, to bring money into the system there? And what's it doing in terms of providing a better business and investment climate? And then the question of trade barriers and trade openness. And we saw some data from, I think from Vace's presentation in terms of talking about the openness of our of the country. So let me just look at a little bit of that data to sort of talk about what that looks like. If I look at Armenia's data, and this is data from UNCTAD, and look at what's happened in terms of FDI inflows, and also I've got the remittance data up there that David was kind enough to mention, that I, with Brian Roberts, from the Armenian International Policy Research Group at the time, from the World Bank, we're working on in terms of looking at what are the ways in which we can encourage remittances to Armenia. You can see that that number has, as Vace's graph it showed you, has fairly well declined, but you'll notice along with that the FDI inflows from hitting a peak around 2010, and we're actually higher in 2007, 2008 than that. But this was a nice, easy picture that I was able to pull from an UNCTAD report on Armenia, show that you've had that inflows have really slowed versus where they were 2005, 2010. Of course, what happened in 2007, 2008, the great financial crisis, in a lot of places, we all talk about what happened in the United States. And if you live here in the US as I do, you're probably focused on what happened here in the US, but what people do not recognize, I think, is that in many parts of the developing world, the financial crisis dried up access to foreign capital because there had been speculation, particularly, I think, in real estate in a lot of parts of the developing world, and that flow has actually subsided over that period. I'm always hesitant to put 2020 data on there because, of course, that's the COVID period, and it has some real impact. And I think I have one extra comment about Vace's presentation that maybe we should touch on regarding that question, but I'll save that one to the end if you don't mind. So I thought I'd look at 4 countries. I thought I'd look at Armenia and Georgia, of course, sitting next to each other. And again, that's 2020 data. That's 69% of GDP being the trade flow in Armenia versus other countries. But all those numbers are being reduced in 2020 by COVID. Those numbers, as Vace's graph showed you, in Armenia they picked up in all these countries as well. So I'm not sure it really mattered quite so much. A couple things that we look at, and I share the questions. I've tried to pick up average monthly wage data from the capital cities in these 4 countries. UK is actually not London, but of course it's Ukraine. I just mistyped the A versus the K there, but that's Ukraine at this moment. You can see that Armenia has, in Yerevan, a higher wage, but I think David asked the question of that split between wages in Armenia, wages in Yerevan and wages elsewhere, which are much lower, and we know that. But just in terms of thinking about foreign direct investment is heavily biased toward the capital city. It's the access to capital, and actually your international workers, that foreign leadership that's working with the company into which they've made the investment, is probably far more likely to move into the country if they can stay in the capital and have access to the amenities that any country's capital is likely to have. The investment freedom, that's data from the Heritage Fund that I watch. on many of these measurements, as you can see, Armenia does okay, but on no less than this one point. Investment freedom has been fairly good in Armenia relative to the experiences we've had in places like Ukraine, places like Kazakhstan, and so forth. But the other thing to remember, of course, its market size is fairly small. It's a small economy compared to Kazakhstan or Ukraine. Its GDP per capita is on a par with, I think, is actually, if I just take GDP rather than income, if I take GDP by the population, it's on a par with the level of Georgia, and it's actually above the level of Ukraine, which is an interesting point in its own right, even though it is half again as far from European capitals. I just picked Paris as an example versus that. So what do we think is really going on here? What do we think is going on with Armenia that's causing it to be maybe not receiving as much FDI inflow? What's happening there? And I think in particular, the one place I find myself looking at is what's happening with access to finance. So if I look at the European and Central Asian economies, the Eastern European and Central Asian economies. So I'm thinking of every country from the intermarium countries in Eastern Europe all the way over to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, and so forth. And I think about how we're doing. We do some things fairly well. And we do talk a lot about education and the lack of educated workers. And I particularly hear this in the IT or ICT sectors, that maybe there's a lack of access. I was reading reports about the lack of access to educated workers. But when the World Bank has done its enterprise surveys, and this one's from 2020 for Armenia, the access to poorly educated workers really isn't much different than other places in that area. Certainly we can do better, but it's really not that, and it's really not political instability or the informal sector. The thing that Armenian entrepreneurs are pointing to the most as being, here's my biggest obstacle. They say it's finance. They say it's access to capital. That is the issue, which is why a strategy that is positively oriented toward FDI, which would include the orientation of having remittances from someplace come back to the country to be used not to just support consumption of a family that sent one of their children off to earn some money and send it back, but to actually have someone go out, earn the money in another country, and then come back with it, with the skills and with the capital to build a new business. Those are the things that I think are actually the parts of where we could see some better improvement in the Armenian economy. And I'm not thinking of which particular goods it is they're going to produce. I think Ruben's covered that in quite nice detail. But just that, where's the source of the next set of entrepreneurs? And I think the source of those entrepreneurs can come from those who go out, develop the experience, and raise the capital, and they bring it back. And in that case, maybe SWIFT doesn't matter, all that stuff, because maybe the money's actually going to come back in their suitcase to start that next business. So one last point about this, and one last point about this, and I'm actually keeping an eye on the clock, David and Hug-Up, and so I don't want to take too much time, too much more time. Is I look at Armenian companies, and I particularly look at those in IT and ICT. There are lots of small companies in there. They are private firms. Their wage rates tend to be low, and most of them tend to be very small. And these are the ones that are lacking access. According to World Bank's BEEPS data, which is another enterprise survey, 42% of all firms and 35% of the small firms have access to a bank loan or a line of credit. So for most of them, what they are relying on for finance is cash that they're able to raise through a variety of means. And it may be that Armenia really is an example of a cash in advance economy. You can't make what you want to make until you have the cash to make it. And that strikes me as being a problem. And again, it's a place where our work, Brian's and my work on remittances and the work that's been done more internationally by Dilip Ratha at the World Bank has, I think, been very, very important in trying to emphasize how remittances is both a lifeline to households, but it also has a role to play in encouraging development in these countries. So in respect to ICT, yes, there are labor force issues, but again, in ICT and IT, as we said we were going to talk about, I want to make sure we have time for Armin. It's very difficult. My point is simply it's not just in that particular area. And I think I was going to say a couple more things, but I'm watching the clock for you, David and Hugup, and I want to be sure that other people have time to participate. So I think I'll end my presentation there, and we can just get on with comments and Armin's contributions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, King. I should add, looking at the enterprise survey data for 2020, things look pretty good for Armenia. I mean, the tax administration, I'm sure you've seen it, but you don't report it, looks much better, not only relative to the rest of the comparator countries, but also relative to where they were in 2013, 2009. So they're doing they're doing the right things.
Right. I think that's, yeah, I think that's the important point and you're right. If I look at the flow of those data over the last 10 years, everything seems to move in the proper direction. And so I do think that we're making progress. It's off what I believe to be a fairly low base. I don't think if we were having this conversation in 2010, it would look like a very, very different conversation. But in 21, 22, there is at least some movement that's happening that recognizes the value of encouraging proper policies that will encourage that direct investment.
But that raises a question that the administration seemed, at least for as far as the World Bank Enterprise Survey data for 2020, the administration seems to have been doing the right, taking the right steps in terms of governance, in terms of taxes and all that. But yet your slides still show very low FDI. So what gives?
Well, I think, and this maybe is the point where I go back to what Vache said, and that really interesting picture of how remittances changed between sourced out of the United States and sourced out of Russia. In the United States, we all got money, right? We got 3 packages of huge amounts of income stabilization for Americans to go out and shop. That meant to buy things. That meant that if you were in service sectors, if you were in manufacturing of durable goods, so if you were working with your hands and you were considered in a vital sector of the economy, you were making lots of money. You had the opportunity to make lots of money. That's exactly where people who are sending remittances are at. These are not the folks that I'm talking about here at the end regarding the new entrepreneurs that are coming. Okay. What they are is the folks who are there to work and send money back to a home economy. In contrast, a lot of the FDI work that I can see happening would be things that are coming out of Russia. And I think it's fair to say that COVID actually affected their economy much more negatively. That is all covered up by the fact that as oil prices rose, you look at their GDP data and you can say, yeah, GDP went up there. Yes, it did. But a lot of that comes out of the fact that they've been able to get more for their oil and gas than they were getting before.
Thank you, King. And now we move on to our last speaker, Armen Khelopian. He's a data scientist and currently a professor at the American University. He's done a lot of interesting stuff with NASA and other places. It's stuff way above my pay grade, I would say, Armen. So I want to turn the floor to you and look forward to actually learning from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And it is absolutely my pleasure to follow Drs. Ndikcan, Drs. Bananyan, and colleague at AUA, Dr. Gabrielian. Specifically, I'd first like to comment in terms of one point my fellow panelists have made in terms of the IT sector. I'll first respond into its different components, which is material for growing the economy. And David, the second point, dubbed an initiative Digital Julfa, which I believe actually bears your last name historically, specifically a callback to our trade network hundreds of years ago that had items of capital content as well as key collaboration points. And I'll do a quick screen share as well. So yes, thank you, David. So I currently serve on the scientific advisory board of one of NASA's institutes. So I'm contributing directly to the stand-up of a $10 trillion industry globally. The question we have for Armenia, and I'm live here from Yerevan, is how do we have our economy from 12 billion triple? And that triple is pertinent because it has implications in terms of geopolitical parity, namely ratios with our neighbors. So let's take another example, and I very much appreciate Dr. Ndikshan's comparisons. If we look at Estonia in the year 2012 had, like our economy, a $12 billion GDP. In 2018, it cleared 30 billion. So the question is, what happened? What happened in those 6 years? And in those 6 years, the answer is 6 startup unicorns. So I want to immediately highlight here, the IT sector has this long tail of tiny outsourcing companies. So Dr. Bananyan made comment here. The assertion I would make, most of these should collapse as per M&A. M&A activity is at subscale. Some should grow into increasingly advanced technical services companies. And then we have a hard divide to our proper R&D core. So in the chat, very much appreciated Dr. Arsen Arakelian's comments. We have a burgeoning biotech. We have a burgeoning set of rising unicorns using computer vision. And a unicorn, to underscore, is a company that goes from 0 to 1 billion fast. Can happen as quickly as 3.5 years. There's several in the economy now. My question to each of you and those watching the stream and those watching this recording, do you know who they are? Who are the champions of our economy? I'm quite deliberately taking a very bottoms-up approach here because our economy relatively is small, and a few major motions like this can make a difference. So with this, I wanted to then split here. We have our IT sector, but we have a tiny proper technology sector that will be our economic base. These are these rising unicorns. So I wanted to underscore this. So let's take a look at some of them. So I'm going to do a quick screen share here. Okay, so one such company is Skyla. This uses computer vision for physical security. So think driverless car technology, but used in stadiums, used in hotels, used in hospitals for slip and fall detection. We have also Embodied. This team here is in the relay factory, so quite poetic, reclaimed old Soviet style factory doing smart manufacturing and design. Interestingly, Moxie made it to the cover of Time magazine. So there's 2 health tech robotics companies from Armenia that made it to the cover of Time magazine. Perhaps we have the highest robotics company on Time magazine per capita. I don't know, but I just want to underscore that these entities exist and they provide a very critical mechanism. Another example, as came up in the chat, is Cognaze, a fintech. As early as a year ago, folks would say, how could an Armenian fintech rise to the global stage? Here showcased in Times Square. Co-investors include Jeff Ingber, former senior vice president of the United States Federal Reserve Bank of New York, as well as Jan Tallinn, tying back to Estonia. Jan Tallinn was co-founder of Skype and an early investor in DeepMind, arguably the most important thing Google has ever bought. So a lot of these activities, and I see my co-founder on the line, we do this via the BAJ Accelerator. So this very pragmatic, bottoms-up approach to boosting the economy. Now, a key aspect of this is education. The reason I am at the university is we want more science and understanding. You know, often a question comes is, are these companies truly Armenian? I would argue that's about as ineffective of a question of asking if a person is Armenian. The point is whether when these entities exit, does Armenia improve? And the mechanism for that is shares. So key education aspect is, do Armenian employees have shares in these entities? The current generation of these technology companies that are valued more than a linear function of their headcount, the answer is yes. So then as a question is, are we a country able to capitalize on that exactly as Estonia did with its 6 unicorns when they were exiting? So with this, and in terms of support around this, with partners, colleagues, we are launching a digital Julfa initiative, very much to the point of supporting these entities vis-a-vis collaboration and the rise of industry. So I'll pause there and I'll summarize. Again, our IT sector, I would go almost so far as to say it's a misnomer. We have a legacy labor arbitrage version, which will not serve us well. That needs to evolve. And then we have a very hard-hitting, but small and growing technology sector. Subcomponents of it could include verticalization in biotech, such as things as computational drug design, as well as mini horizontals, computer vision and various applications. So with that, we highly welcome collaboration. If you'd like to learn more about these entities, certainly do reach out. And again, absolute privilege to be on this esteemed panel here.
Thank you, Armin. 2 quick questions. I remember, and the reason I remember Estonia, I worked with somebody who actually was Estonian, is Estonian. And he would tell me that Finland essentially, Sweden as well, but mostly Finland, that they invested heavily in the country. And I can see where you're going in terms of having an industry grow from $1 to $1 billion almost overnight. But that raises a question in terms of, do we have enough? And I think you addressed it a little bit in terms of the education, people being there and so forth. How much funding do you need from the outside to do this? And the second question, more important question that I have, how do you build on this essentially to amplify the effect of whatever these unicorns will essentially become? How do you make their effect, their presence reflected in the prosperity of the rest of the economy, right? I mean, essentially we have a limited number of employees that could be engaged in such activities. I think this is a question that probably you have faced before, and I'll let you answer it.
Sure, thank you so much, David. To reply in terms of its 2 major constituent components, how do we catalyze and accelerate this positive trend, these particular entities? And then how do we ensure that they actually make an impact? And I see a question that in the chat into a similar vein on that latter point. So our strategy here involves capital, content, customers. So the unicorn journey involves a capital infusion, involves education, involves massive customer acquisition, because these companies trade on a high multiple per their revenue. So we have stood up the Instill Fund. We spend quite a large number of times with the BAJ Accelerator, over 2,500 co-investor network, literally talking to sovereign wealth funds. So there's a capital movement, but capital movement is not enough. Next is content in terms of more science-based startups. If you look at these unicorns, they actually have proper R&D cores. And that's something we need to foster via our institutes, via our universities. So training of the technical co-founders, development of that intellectual property, and then via colleagues, for example, Orion Worldwide Innovations, helping to acquire customers, increasing the strength of Armenia as a brand in terms of these tech capability. So this is the motion to accentuate these unicorns, capital, content, customers. We welcome folks to collaborate, support these entities. In terms of whether they make an impact, I was absolutely shocked that the giving of stocks or stock options to Armenian employees is a relatively new phenomenon. We have the distinguished Alice Sion on the first, one of the first ever to do so. That motion is so new, it's startling. And that is one of the key mechanisms. Wealth stays in the country and cascades. A country's strength is its families, not the few families, but a large swath participating. So a few things here, David. No perfect answers, but this is the motion, the strategy, and the unicorns are rising.
Thank you, Armin. Before I open the floor to questions, Mr. Korovian, this is your chance if you want to say a word or two. I think it's very appropriate, if you will.
Thank you. First of all, I thank to all panelists for such an interesting discussions, comments. I didn't know King. Get to know him. Also, I'm tired because I've been in journey today more than 6 hours. So if I'm less energetic, then I just apologize.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I know it's very late in Yerevan, so
Yeah.
but if you're interested, we would love to hear from you.
Firstly, I just want to mention that in January Yerevan we had in Armenia we had a very nice economic result, which is like more than 15% growth year over year, and exports grew more than 50% year on year, which is important. Of course, there are different factors for that, but yeah, I mean, in current data is more optimistic than negative. Therefore, I mean, we are going to ride the wave. So the situation with Russia and Ukrainian tension is, of course, very complicated, and we have many factors there, which are both negative and opportunistic, as Mr. Gaprinan mentioned. So I've just mentioned some of them. The weakening of Russian ruble actually will definitely affect Armenian exports to Russia. It was 800 million last year, and previously when Russia invaded or Russia got Crimea and sanctions were imposed on Russia, Armenia lost 40% of exports to Russia next 12 months time, and also Armenia lost 40% of remittances from Russia again in the next 12 months time. So we don't see so much weakening as previously, but I mean, we have to wait for a bit more to see what the real effect of the sanctions are. So, and of course, Russian goods will get cheaper compared to Armenians in the market of Armenia and more competitive, and it will affect, of course, the manufacturing industry and other industries. So these are negative things, but there are also positive things. You can see that there is a very high interest from Russian people. Actually, the new phenomenon that they want to get Armenian passport. They can understand that this is not a short-term stuff and short-term path. And last several days, we could see many Russians trying to understand what is the way to get Armenian passport. And then there are companies. There are a lot of companies in high-tech industry and in other industries that want to change their residence. And I received a message from founder of CRISP, David Baldasaryan, who just told me that a Russian high-tech company with 200 top developers is moving from Russia to Armenia just this weekend, and there are others to follow. Because I mean, there are companies that work for international companies and have any relations with other countries, then they will have big complexity to work from Russia. So I just don't want to. Yes, but it's the trend, and actually Armenia is the Then the other trend that we can see is industrial companies that need modern equipment, modern conveyor lines, etc. There are also interest from such companies. And of course, I mean, we could have done it earlier, but Armenia actually failed to have modern style industrial parks that we are going to do in next several years' time. But I mean, I'm trying. I mean, I have invited our half Armenian, half Palestinian guy, Charles Malas, who is top expert in industrial parks, to come over and help us build 3 such parks in time, and we hope to host also Russian here. But also, I mean, the other aspect of our idea of having parks is to host also European companies or Western companies that want to tap the Eurasian Economic Union. Currently, Armenia is the only country where such companies can put their production lines, etc. And we can see also interest from Western want to have their facilities, their factories. That's still to come. Then, of course, we have financial sector and probable switching off Russian banks from SWIFT will definitely raise interest to Armenian banking system, which Mr. Gabrielian also mentioned in his presentation. Yeah, I mean, we will see higher scrutiny. US and other countries to transactions that are from Armenian banking sector. Again, this is something that is manageable, and we can try to find the right balance between what's allowed and what's possible. Try to get more out of it. Then, of course, which is very, very problematic, is Russian companies that work in Armenia and are in sanctions. So this is Gazprom, and then Russian atomic Rosatom, which is their nuclear power plant operator. They are operating Armenia's nuclear power plant, and then Russian railways and other companies that are state-owned Russian big companies, and they manage infrastructure in Armenia. The most problematic part was if they are under sanctions and they have difficulties to operate Armenian infrastructure, then this is something that is very very disturbing. So, and then the other part that should be managed carefully is the airlines. As you know, there are sanctions on the Russian airlines on both planes and spare parts, which actually mean that after some very short period of time, Russian airline companies not be able to operate their company. This means that we will have difficulties in the tourism inflow, which is a big foreign currency inflow. So, but what we can do is just to properly understand all these challenges and address them quickly, and also to put some interest, yeah, and try to get most out of it. So, team of Ministry of Finance is working on all these issues, and not only this, so there are many more, but less obvious and less important. And we are trying to get most out of it. So this is the situation with Russia. But I'd like also to touch some points on the presentation that Ruben made. Particularly, I agree with him that productivity is the most important thing to work on, because really Armenia's labor productivity has a huge potential. And I'll just bring a small example of my own business experience. When 2009, we had a German consulting company to help us in our supermarket business, and just improving processes, we were able to improve productivity without very small investments, like 3 times, increasing productivity from $14 revenue per man hour in our supermarket chain to $40 per man hour revenue. So, and now we are actually working on 3 factors to improve productivity of our economy. And these are digital transformation. You know that 91% of Armenian companies are digitally immature. Second is modernization of equipment, and we already run modernization program for Armenia's economy. We actually subsidize almost all bank loan interests that are for new equipment. And the third is actually trying to help Armenian companies to engage top-class expats from other countries that can come over and help with improvement of processes, which is actually also we can see that in almost all Armenian companies there's a room for doing this. So these three will definitely help to improve Armenian economy, labor productivity, and of course, at the first glance, we can think that this will lead also to increasing of unemployment, but in reality, improvement of productivity usually leads to the improvement of competitiveness, which also leads to improvement of sales and volumes, and that may also lead to increase of employment as well. So at any rate, we have to work on the competitiveness of Armenia. I think that these factors, and we can see, I mean, we can see continuing improvement of productivity, although we are far from Russia, which is 2 times more productive than Armenia, and OECD countries, which are 7 times more productive than Armenia's economy. In textile, just a sentence about all these sectors that UNCTAD report refers to Armenia's most promising industries. Textile, by the way, just before going into these industries, I just want to let you know that in our ministry, we try to engage as many diaspora Armenians as possible. Last year times, I've appointed 4 deputies. 3 of them are from abroad, from Russia, one from Luxembourg. A Canadian lady now leads the tourism committee. Many other guys lead the top position in the Ministry of Economy, and I see Armenia's future just engaging as much diaspora Armenians as possible, because they're much more competitive and professional than local Armenians. Because, and unfortunately, Armenia's economy was locked and without any competitive environment during the last 50 years' time. And are you not hearing? Okay. So, and therefore, I mean, our greatest assets are Armenians from abroad. So, in textile, we are trying to move the industry from just selling a labor force to a creative industry, fashion industry, where we can also sell our products and sell our brands and marketing. In tourism, our idea is that we shouldn't go in the way that Georgia goes, and attract as many tourists as possible, because it also leads to locking a lot of people in this not so productive sector of the economy. What we want to do is to invest in infrastructure and try to increase the take per tourist, so that we get more per tourist, but not too many tourists that can also lock many people in this high tech, and also tech transfer is very important. In Armenia, we don't have tech transfer institution, but now we work closely with, or again, the diasporan friends to set up this institution in academic and research institutes and universities, so that we can make scientific research more available to companies, and also to increase science company industry from nothing to something. Again, pharma is our priority, and complexity is also our priority. And to say the truth, now just 1.8% of our experts can be considered as high-tech experts, but we want to dramatically increase this, and we work on this. On SME development, Armenia has the highest new companies per capita in the world each year, but also the failures are as much. We want to set up and we are working on setting up an incubation that will help new companies to survive and become sustainable and bankable. Our concentration will be the high growth companies, not only in IT sector, but also in other manufacturing sector. So these are just in small sentences remarks about Ruben's presentation. We have different approaches, I mean, I'm always more optimistic than my friend Baci Gabrielian is on the potential of economy and what can we do. And I think that, I mean, our potential in business environment, in helping investment projects it done. I mean, he's more theoretical, I'm more practical. I can see many projects that are not being done because of bureaucracy and because of most things, and we actually did many such projects happen last year, and others are coming as well, we need to go forward with the reform agenda to decrease possibilities of corruption and changing the whole system that worked for decades for making money for officials, from a system that is less dependent on human factor, and that everything can be done, I mean, digitally and without minimum involvement of bureaucrats and state officials, so that things are done easier, faster. that's it. I mean, this is all that I would add here. But I think that we have agreed with Mr. Panasyan that in some other meetings, I will go ahead with my own presentation to go deeper in the economic policy. That may give also a clue on what we are specifically doing to engage investments, to develop sectors of manufacturing industry.
This sounds a very promising agenda. I really would like to thank you, Minister Shachnor. I know it's midnight in Yerevan, and to have you join us has been priceless. I also want to thank the other folks from Yerevan. It is midnight. It's Bache and Armin, I don't know who else. I'm very grateful that you were able to join us past midnight.
May I say just one word? I very much appreciate that you came to us and you gave very valuable information to us and insights, especially on how to improve productivity, how proactive you are in attracting foreign direct investment, and very good news about moving to Yerevan of companies. And maybe that you will further develop on strategies how to make Armenia regional center for business and financial services, because our banking sector is very good, our drum is stable. We can have an ambition to sort of attract the entrepreneurs' money into Armenian banks from Arab countries, from Russia, from Central Asia. In other words, replacing a little bit Cyprus in the region. Just an idea. Thank you very much, Minister. Greatly appreciated.
A few questions I had from the chat. I want to raise it to the panelists. There's a question about dependency on mining. Obviously, mining is a good source of revenues to the government, so I can see the pluses, and obviously it creates jobs. But this writer essentially argues that there could be some negative issues in terms of related to environmental concerns. Anybody want to address the mining? I mean, it can be an important source for the economy, obviously, but also with the negative environmental consequences. Any takers?
I can jump in. There's a few industries yet to be born. One is medical tourism and concierge medicine. So very specifically here, we have a high number of high quality physicians by per capita. So the question is, how do we engage patients from areas with direct flights? There's also things very much as per the Swiss example, or their panelists mentioned, we're seeing some pockets of high-end manufacturing with the value being on the quality assurance processes and comparatively lightweight components. So smart agriculture, smart manufacturing, medical tourism, there's all sorts of things to shift toward, let alone the startup unicorns I anchored in my comments. So something to kick us off, David.
Can I say about mining?
Sure, go ahead.
Because in my work in UNCTAD, I was also head of commodities, and I created Global Commodities Forum. And I teach commodities course at Webster University every year. Now, commodity-dependent economies have a prospect of using fourth industrial revolution technologies in order to modernize commodity sector and create value-added activities in the commodity supply chain where they are a source of production. So if possible for Armenia and the government and foreign investors in copper industry, in fact, I always invited Armenia to become a member of the commodity body which UNCTAD created. It's called Commodity Study Group. of non-ferrous metals, which is in Lisbon, and they have very important meetings twice a year. I attended when I was head of commodities. They discussed the situation in copper, nickel, and other non-ferrous metals markets, and copper is becoming as important as iron ore in terms of the volume of, I think at some point, the export of copper and the export of iron ore was comparable number of $500 billion. And Armenia should participate in that body. Russia is participating, of course, Chile and others are participating, and learn from the other comparators the experience. But basically, the advice would be to think how to produce copper billets and other semi-manufactured products instead of moving primary copper from a landlocked country like Armenia to the destination countries. That is my advice, and hopefully something is done in that sense. Thank you.
And another question that came up relates to unblocking transport routes. Any takers on this?
I will try to comment on this. Of course, we shouldn't be in a hurry, but yeah, things are seem to go in a positive way, so that we can expect after some time unlocking of communication. But we all have to remember that Azerbaijan will definitely look into the symmetric, at least symmetric unblocking, which means that for example, a railway connectivity between Yerevan and Azerbaijan will be like after several years, 3-4 years, because the whole new line should be built between Yerevan and Azerbaijan, and it's a huge investment, like 1.2 billion investment will be made like in next 3-4 years time. And on the road connectivity, it may be faster, but again, there is a need for massive capital investments, and there is a time that is needed for such an investment. And that's not so fast, and it's years away. But we still can do more than we have now to connect Armenia's railway system to Eurasian network, which is just like weeks away from now, because one big project that we decided and started to do is to start or to subsidize a fair lane connectivity in ports of Poti and Russia, ports of Georgia and Russia, so that we can move railways from Armenia to the Eurasian Union, and of course one of the options is to move copper ore that we now send through sea to send copper ore from Armenia to China, the main buyer, through railways, and get less expensive. But it also means that we will get cheaper raw materials from Asia, and also send our heavy industrial products also by railway. I mean, until now, frankly speaking, we do not have properly working. That's everyone knows is very important to
What
develop.
about Iran, Armenia, Minister? Iran, Armenia transportation linked to
Yeah.
China and Russia
So,
and Europe.
Of course, the easiest part of all this unblocking is connecting Armenia to Iran. Because it's just a very small investment in the part of Yerevan, which just may be done in couple of months' time, and the railway can work. But I'm confident, and I'm more than sure that it shouldn't go just before connecting Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. So Azerbaijan will wait until the railway is constructed, may connect Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan and Turkey, and just
And highway Armenia, Iran.
Highway Armenia, Iran through Azerbaijan.
No, directly through Zangezur.
Yeah. So our Armenian government approved approximately $1 billion investment project between Sishan and Kajaran that has like 27. I'm not sure about number, but it's many bridges and many tunnels. The longest is 9 kilometer long tunnel. That is one of the major parts of north-south route. But again, it's at least 3-4 years, but maybe it's 6 years project that will dramatically decrease travel time between Mehri, southern border of Armenia, to Yerevan. So again, opportunities are good, but it's not tomorrow.
Let me
Armin, do you
chip
have
in.
Armin? Do you want to follow up? Do you have a follow up, Armin?
Can I just
follow up,
say
yeah.
that,
Sorry.
David, very short. Given our current structure of the economy, opening up railway down south is not going to have great impact given our trade flows and also the structure of the economy. The only thing that railway-wise makes economic sense is copper ore. The rest is basically north and westbound. And far more prospective is the north-south route going through the Zangezur region. It is both strategically important and actually better for the amount of the goods to be moved.
Yeah, Armin, I thought you had a question, Armin, no?
David, just one
sorry.
note on the mining. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm not sure that everyone knows, but last year, Ministry of Economy imposed an additional export tax on copper and molybdenum ore, which was due to extra high prices, and we saw that the royalty system that we had in Armenia doesn't properly address extra high prices, and what we did is imposed an additional export duty on copper and molybdenum ore, and it contributed to the budget like 25 billion drams additional revenue, which is in three months time, which is like if we just compare, it's increasing royalty fee by 3 times. Yeah, and that really helped us in addressing all the additional expenses that we had after the double shock that we had in 2020. And of course, this year our budget is dramatically bigger than 2021. We actually moved our macroeconomic frame for the budget to a different to a higher curve, and we hope that in next 5 years time we will be able to improve many areas from health, education, culture, science, and others that were exhausted during the last 30 years time. So again, if you just look into the situation, we have many things to do in almost every area, because our education system needs heavy investment, our science needs heavy investment, healthcare system and just health of the people needs to be invested a lot. So and of course economy itself, infrastructure. So we have big investments that we have to do in the irrigation water and drinking water system. Again, many challenges ahead of us, but all this should be done, and nothing can wait.
May I say a word, Minister? There is a formula, a best practice formula of export taxes on mining and energy, which is the following. The government agrees on the formula depending on the local operator of mining, plus profit, plus what they need to sort of recover, and then government and the company, they share the extra profit coming from higher prices based on formula. But of course, when price comes down, you let them, you don't have an export tax, because they need to recover their expenditures. They need to have their minimal rate of profit. But what is above is based on formula. Is it the same case in Armenia or not?
Yeah, it's almost the same case. Of course, mines are complaining. They say that the industry is cyclic, and then they have periods of extra high profits, and then there are also periods of loss-making, and one covers each other. But I mean, what we have now is sharing the extra profit from the normal profits between us and the mine operators. But also
Yes,
we are
exactly.
now adopting a new royalty law that is universal for all the cases. If the prices go down, then we take less. If the prices go up, then we take more. But all in all, we ensure normal profitability of the mine operators. So I think that the new system that probably will be enforced by the end of the year will just cover all situations, and we will get more fair distribution of mine revenues between people of
If-
Armenia
Let's
and
have,
mine operators.
Ruben, could you, I mean, if you have a lot of ideas, could you follow up with Minister Yerevan, with your permission, of course? I think probably that would be the best. I think I'd like us to spend 5 more minutes. If you have any comments, thoughts you want to share, this is a good time to do it. On this topic, education, policies that the government should be pursuing, or any particular assistance related to what's going on in terms of the potential impact on businesses in Armenia because of the current war. Again, of course, you're going to do it all in 5 minutes, so it's I'll leave the floor open to you.
David, is this a question for me?
No, for in general, anybody who has any thoughts. The reason I'm stopping this now is that it's 12:30 in Yerevan, 12:30 in the morning, and I think it's only fair. It's only fair to put.
I just want to touch one last point, probably, which is the investments in science. You've probably heard that we have increased financing of science by 2 times almost this year, and we'll be increasing another 100% by the next 2 years' time. And we can definitely see the clearly new interest from the young scientists to remain a scientist in different areas, which is really very important. According to Armenia's 2050 vision, so we want to have a knowledge-based economy in 2030s, which actually means that we have to heavily invest in science in 2020s, so that we see the factor of science in our economy in the next decade. And therefore, I mean, we already can see that there is an increased interest from the young scientists for the science because of the change of the attitude of the government for the science, and hopefully we will stick to this for the next years and change again back, Armenia's attitude and understanding of how science is important for the development of our nation.
Thank you. So I want
maybe here, Mr. Arakelian can also comment, who has raised his hand, and he is the director of one of the very important scientific institutions in Armenia.
Let's see here. Okay. Oh, he has a question. Sorry. Oh, okay.
Hello. Good.
Go ahead, Arsene. Go ahead.
Good morning and good evening. I'd like to first of all thank ARPA for organizing this wonderful panel. It was really inspiring and it was really valuable to hear a lot of different opinions. I'd like to elaborate on what Minister Yerevan told about development of science. Of course, for the very long time, for the first time, we saw steps taken from government to really increase the attractiveness of the science, increase the inflow of young talents into high tech and research and development. However, I also would like to mention that in order to have a really contemporary and competitive scientific environment in Armenia, we have to invest heavily into infrastructure. Currently, the race was focused on increasing the salaries, but without having good centers equipped with the latest scientific equipment, equipped with the latest the possibilities for doing the most recent or cutting-edge research. This wouldn't be as effective as one may think. So I really hope that in future years, government would invest not only into the salaries, but also would invest in creation in Armenia centers of excellence in several priority areas, which would first help unicorns to develop in Armenia, then to remain in Armenia for doing their at least core science and development. And also this would serve as a attraction point for international talent that we really heavily need to increase the quality of education and preparation of new like scientific workforce. And thanks
thank you,
for
Arsen.
giving me
Sorry.
time.
Thank you, Arsen. It's about 12:30 a.m. in Yerevan, and so I think probably this is as good a place to stop. I want to thank Professors Gabrielian, Professor Indigjian, Professor Baran, Professor Holopian, and Minister Kerobian for being with us today. And at this point, I'd like to turn this over to Hagop Panosyan. Hagop, it's yours.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you again for all the panelists and also Minister Kerobian and the rest of the attendees. We are hoping that in March next month, Mr. Kerobian will present his vision for the economy of Armenia, which will be another interesting and important presentation. And so ARPA Institute thanks everybody, and we will hope that you will join us in the next time. And again, ARPA has been an advocate for big projects in Armenia, because only big projects can attract big scientists and it can increase the economy significantly. So that requires both, of course, infrastructure, instrumentation, and capabilities. So I think the government is working towards that. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.